Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, wheelers, dealers, and wound healers, welcome along to the Joe Spivey YouTube channel, where we discuss books and little else, and welcome along to another of my random reviews, folks. Today we're going to be looking at the 2010 memoir, Hitch 22, as I'm sure you already discerned from the title. Now, first of all, it's lovely to be back in the Kingdom of Kingston upon Hull, the People's Republic of East Yorkshire, and I have learned over the past few days, folks, that I really do despise difference. I'm back in the kind of remedial bath of routine. Over when I was visiting Grand Viceroy Spivey in Derbyshire, the different utensils, different bus routes, different topographies, different doors, different stairs, different shops, different waking times and sleeping times, different meals, different habits in general. I didn't despise it, folks, but it sort of exercised a difference in me, and I was very, very relieved. There was a huge metaphysical exhalation when I finally stepped back over the door after fighting with British Rail for about 4 or 5 hours, swerving cancellations and, beating up ticket collectors and all of that. It was nice to finally be back in, as I say, Kingston upon Hull. But anyway, let's get back to today's main subject. This is the memoir of Christopher Hitchens, probably the last thing published whilst he was alive, the last book published whilst he was alive. This was released in 2010, I think just before he got the news that he was going, he was probably going to suffer a demise at the hands of esophageal cancer, which is obviously a very, very deep shame. But anyway, the last thing that was ever written, I'm sure things have been compiled and published posthumously, but yeah, how to describe Christopher Hitchens. It says here on the front, I think, or at least one of his essays was commented by Ian McEwan as saying that if Christopher Hitchens had never existed, we wouldn't be able to invent him. Quite a nice way of phrasing it, but he was a, goodness me, he was a vociferous columnist. I'm going to say he was a writer first and foremost, I think. He was a political activist. He was a raconteur. He was, just somebody that was very, very capable. He loved an audience, very, very capable of, sitting by the fire and unfurling a tale. And yeah, he was probably, besides sort of Lincoln, Kennedy, Cicero, and William F. Buckley, he was probably the most gifted orator, most persuasive and effective orator ever to have wagged his tongue. And that comes through throughout this book. So we've got quite an interesting life, to say the least. Not quite on sort of Brian Blessed levels, but still noteworthy, as it were, and praiseworthy. He was born, I believe, in Malta. He was the son, as he's got an equal, not quite an equally famous brother, but again, a notable brother, Peter Hitchens. They were both born roughly within the same few years, and they were born at the British Naval Base of Malta. His father, pseudonymized as Commander Hitchens in this book, was somebody who was probably instrumental to Britain's success in World War II, and he had a kind of lower middle class bohemian upbringing with his mother Yvonne, and you get the sense of a very, very, very curious young individual, somebody who was looking for a purpose, and somebody who found many, many political causes as a result. So he goes to boarding school. He discusses that really, really nicely in here about, buggery and about, taking one up the wrong one, perhaps, or, sort of fiddling about with young men, as happens in boarding schools. Contrary to popular belief, and despite my sartorial elegance and my plum-throated effrontery, I have never stepped foot in a boarding house, folks, so I have no idea of the practices therein, but, Hitchens does a great job of, encapsulating it, or, giving us a little bit of a rendition of what it might have been like to attend one. Then he gets into Oxford and goes to either Magdalen or Balliol College, I can't remember, and that is the first time at which he starts to be, quite famous, and there's a charisma about him. There is there's a long-lasting, enduring impression of him from people that he meets. and he just sounds like a very very interesting person to be around. So I've got 4 or 5 sections that I want to read out and to expand upon. But he's probably known nowadays really as a controversialist. There are innumerable compilations on YouTube of his polemic, argumentative style and his real, staunchly adversarial nature on the stage whenever he was taking on religious leaders or defenders of Bill Clinton. Not that there are very many of those. Whenever he found an intellectual or political opponent, he was very, very good at, tapping them on the head and then, batting them through the covers, to use an English idiom. So that is what he's most famous for now. He was called a controversialist and a contrarian in his time. Of course, he discarded and derided those sobriquets and those labels, but it was basically true. It is one thing to swim against the consensus, as it were. It's one thing to have a kind of idiosyncratic singular mind of your own, and to try and move away from the consensus, as I say, and try and attract a readership that way. And it's another thing to calculate just what is the most controversial topic, the most controversial angle on one particular topic, and steam ahead on that front. I think it was often very, very deliberate in Christopher's case, whether that's the war in Iraq or whether that is the what should we say, the de-lionization of Mother Teresa, the first person to have represented the devil pro bono or something. And I think many of it was contrived in its crudest terms. I think most of the time he was doing it for purposes of attention and for monetary advantage. I don't think very many of his positions were particularly well felt. I don't think they were long felt. I don't think that they kind of, matured in the gristle of his viscera for very long. I think most of the time he was just looking to make a quick buck, which is a really awful insult, really, for somebody who is at least an ostensible free thinker. The worst accusation you can hurl at them is that they are inauthentic, but I can't help but feel, particularly with God is Not Great and all of that he was being inauthentic. He was championing a decent cause, but was doing it from bad faith, if you'll pardon the pun. So anyway, got some sections I want to read out, and he's a very good writer. He is a stylist and a wordsmith, and you can spot a Hitchensian sentence at 500 yards, which is always a tick in my box. It's always something that we have celebrated on this channel in the past. But this first section is when the scales of imposed seniority kind of fall from his eyes. We've all had those experiences where a senior figure in our lives, a principal figure in our lives, somebody who, a pedagogue who has taught us, and somebody who is above us, a kind of superior figure. Suddenly the scales fall from our eyes, and we realize that person is in fact a little bit of an idiot. We realize that there is no sort of knock on the door in the middle of the night and somebody hands you a book, a how-to guide to adulthood. It's a very, very slow process, and the people that we have sort of respected or deferred to or demurred in front of are actually just imbeciles. And this is when he becomes a part of the Oxford Speaking Society, the Oxford Union, and meets lots of parliamentarians who he finds to be demonstrable imbeciles. Here we go. Through this and other experiences, I began to discern one of the elements of an education. Get as near to the supposed masters and commanders as you can, and see what stuff they are really made of. As I watched famous scholars and professors flounder here and there, I also, in my career as a speaker at the Oxford Union, had a chance to meet senior ministers and parliamentarians up close and dine with them before as well as drink with them afterward, and be amazed once again at how ignorant and sometimes plain stupid were the people who claimed to run the country. This was an essential stage of my formation, and one for which I am hugely grateful, though I fear it must have made me much more insufferably cocky and sure of myself than I deserved to be. A consciousness of rectitude can be a terrible thing, and in those days I didn't just think that I was right, I thought that we, our group of international socialists in particular, were being damn well proved right. If you have never yourself had the experience of feeling that you are yoked to the great steam engine of history, then allow me to inform you that the conviction is a very intoxicating one. You can see there he flirts with self-effacement. He likes to show a little bit of contrition and a little bit of modesty there. Of course, he was probably the most arrogant person that is on YouTube, apart from you know, President Donald Trump and Andrew Tate and the Paul brothers and a few notable others. He was extraordinarily arrogant, and he liked to just kind of build in a little bit of modesty and, as I say, a little bit of self-effacement and flagellation, just a little bit of contrition and a little bit of humour in there. When in fact, you know, he loved the fact that he was cocky and remained insufferably cocky for the remainder of his days. Next up, we have his first meeting with Martin Amis. This Martin Amis was the person through whom I first came into contact or first learnt of Christopher Hitchens. Martin Amis is my literary gatekeeper, and they were the best of friends, and they had, you know, hours and hours and hours of conversations with one another about the fair sex and about you know, what might we say, literary propriety and all of those habits and rabbits and things. And this is when he first meets Martin Amis through the intermediary of Peter Ackroyd, who was at the time, and I think remains, he's a very great literary critic, and he was at the time a worker on the Spectator magazine. And this is the first meeting. His office performed. Ackroyd withdrew, and the remaining pair of us later played some desultory pinball in another bar. I noticed that Martin had the gift of mimicry. He could drop or raise his voice and alter his features and just simply be the person we were talking about. I cannot now remember who. He asked me which novelist I enjoyed, and I first mentioned Graham Greene. This answer palpably did not excite him with its adventurousness. In answer to my reciprocal question, he said that he thought one had to look for something between the twin peaks of Dickens and Nabokov, and it came back to me that Fenton had said to me how almost frighteningly assured all Martin's literary essays were turning out to be. I don't recollect how the evening ended, but some kind of mutuality had been stirred, and we soon enough had dinner with our respective girlfriends in some Cypriot taverna in Camden Town, where things went with a swing, and I can remember making him laugh. That section sort of made me consider just how instrumental mimicry is in being a decent writer and storyteller. I, for one, am told, and I believe myself to be a very, very good mimic indeed. I can do the most disparate voices. I can do regional accents. I can do Scottish, Welsh. I can do Scouse. I can do Mancunian. I can do, you know, Black Country Somerset. I can do Bristol. I can do Cockney. I can do Birmingham, Midlands. But I can also do John F. Kennedy. I can do the disgraced paedophile and sadist Jimmy Savile. I can do Adolf Hitler at the pulpit. Strange, that one, isn't it? I can do President Trump. Who else can I can do, I can do Anthony Hopkins in The Silence of the Lambs. I can do all sorts of figures and be the person in the room. I can do Mick Jagger, the irreverent pop star, all sorts of people. And I was just wondering quite how instrumental mimicry is, I say, in the writing process. If you can, you know, imitate someone's voice, does that somehow work cognitively with one's ability to write? A little bit of self-indulgence, but I thought it was worth mentioning. And if indeed you do want an impressions video, then you're going to have to pay me a princely sum, because that would be embarrassing. The next section is when Christopher first runs into Margaret Thatcher, who was the Conservative leader in Britain for, how long was it? Was it I think it was 1979 to sometime in the 90s. So it was a good long while, a decadal Prime Minister. And she has a very mixed record in this country. She has her adherents and her dissenters. And I am a blend of the two. I think she had a, you know, decent backbone that we are lacking nowadays, but she reduced the efficacy of local government, and she made a laudable attempt to master the trade unions, but then she, you know, introduced the kind of rabid, rampant free market capitalism. And so it's a 50-50 record, but Hitchens liked her on initial encounter, and they had a little bit of a flirty meeting, and he thought that she was very, very attractive, which is, of course, you know, a woman's sexual viability shouldn't be the first point of criticism, but it's in there, folks. If we're a heterosexual male, it's in there. And he finds her really very attractive, and I think it was either himself or Martin Amis, or again some critic who said that Thatcher had the eyes of Caligula and the mouth of Marilyn Monroe, and everybody was expecting her to kind of walk into the wrong toilet. But here we are. This is the initial meeting. I had and have eyewitness to this. At the time, though, I hardly believed it myself. It is only from a later perspective, looking back on the manner in which she slaughtered and cowed all the former male leadership of her party and replaced them with pliant tools, that I appreciate the premonitory glimpse of what someone in another context once called the smack of firm government that I had been afforded. Even at the time, as I left that party, I knew I had met someone rather impressive, and the worst of Thatcherism, as I was beginning by degrees to discover, was the rodent slowly stirring in my viscera, the uneasy but unbanishable feeling that on some essential matters she might be right. Yeah, so that's the initial impression of Thatcher. Next up, we have a fight with, or at least a kind of elongated, prolonged, erstwhile discussion in print with Noam Chomsky, and about anti-Westernism on the latter's part. This is a very, very, very decent section indeed. Hitchens was really very good at arguing, and he could really hold a grudge, and was a very mellifluous stylist, and was a very good hater, as I say. So this is Chomsky's anti-Westernism and Hitchens' take on it. Anyway, I didn't have long to wait for my fears about the left to prove correct. This is about 9/11 and the weird way in which very many commentators on the left somehow thought that 9/11 was the West and America's just desserts, that they had somehow caused it, and that there was apparently no distinction to be drawn between, military action in Sudan or in the Middle East and, flying civilian airlines into a densely populated area. The idea that was kind of quid pro quo, which is, of course, absolutely reprehensible. But anyway, comparing al-Qaeda's use of stolen airplanes with President Clinton's certainly atrocious use of cruise missiles against Sudan 3 years before, which were at least ostensibly directed at al-Qaeda targets, Noam Chomsky found the moral balance to be approximately even, with the United States at perhaps a slight disadvantage. He also described the potential civilian casualties of American counterstroke in Afghanistan as amounting to a silent genocide. As time had elapsed, I had gradually been made aware that there was a deep division between Noam and myself. Highly critical as we both were of American foreign policy, the difference came down to this: regarding almost everything since Columbus as having been one continuous succession of genocide and land thefts, he did not really believe that the United States of America was a good idea to begin with. Whereas I had slowly come to appreciate that it most certainly was, and was beginning to feel less and less shy about saying so. We commenced a duel, conducted largely in cyberspace, in which I began by pointing out the difference between unmanned cruise missiles on the one hand and crowded civilian airliners rammed into heavily populated buildings on the other. We more or less went on from there. And I didn't realise he was so disparaging of Noam Chomsky. I thought that he would have found a political bedfellow in him, but it's nice to know that indeed he was an enemy of, or not an enemy, but a criticiser of him. And last but not least, we have a comment on not so much debauchery, but the chapter is subtitled "A Short Footnote on the Grape and the Grain." In other words, he is romanticising imbibement of alcohol and therefore creating very many people who have found themselves under the yoke of alcoholism and of addiction to that horrid substance. Not that I'm against drinking altogether. I indulge on sparse occasions, but yeah, he talks about the virtues of it and of his own habits, which have of course been lionized and have been immortalized in very many anecdotes. But yeah, nonetheless, let's go into it. More affecting still is this is talking about when people used to just give him Johnny Walker Black whenever he would go around to their house or whatever. More affecting still is the anxious, considerate way that my hosts greets me, sometimes even at the airport, with a large bottle of Johnny Walker Black label. It's almost as if they feel that they must propitiate the demon that I bring along with me. Interviewers arriving at my apartment frequently do the same, as if appeasing the insatiable. I don't want to say anything that will put even a small dent into this happy practice, but I do feel that I owe a few words. There was a time when I could reckon to outperform all but the most hardened imbibers, but I now drink relatively carefully. This ought to be obvious by induction. On average, I produce at least 1,000 words of principal copy every day, and sometimes more. I have never missed a deadline. I give a class or a lecture or a seminar, perhaps 4 times a month, and have never been late for an engagement or shown up the worse for wear. Yada, yada, yada. It's the professional deformation of many writers, and has ruined not a few. I remember Kingsley Amis, himself no slouch, saying that he could tell on what page of the novel Paul Scott had reached for the bottle and thrown caution to the winds. I work at home where there is indeed a bar room and can suit myself, but I don't. At about midday, a decent slug of Mr. Walker's amber restorative, another clever little wordplay there, amber restorative, cut with Perrier water and no ice. At luncheon, perhaps half a bottle of red wine, not always more, but never less. Then back to the desk and ready to repeat the treatment at the evening meal. No after-dinner drinks, most especially nothing sweet, and never ever any brandy. Nightcaps depend on how well the day went, but always the mixture as before. No mixing, no messing around with a gin here and a vodka there. Alcohol makes other people less tedious and food less bland, and can help provide what the Greeks call entheos, or the slight buzz of inspiration when reading or writing. And that pretty much covers it there, folks. Obviously, as I say, a very sad demise. I think the ubiquity, or at least popularity and political viability and electability of Donald Trump would be as nothing compared to the staunch criticism that Christopher Hitchens would array at him. I think Christopher Hitchens, if he were alive today and as vivacious as his brother is, and even as Noam Chomsky is, if he had an active YouTube channel, it would have 20 or 30 million subscribers. He would be the loudest and most sonorous critic and voice against Donald Trump and the creationist drudgery that is spoliating or spoiling, much of the American landmass. I don't think we would have had such staunch populism if Christopher Hitchens was still alive today and was still, as I say, voicing his opinions. But yes, that just about covers me for today, folks. I don't want to drone on for too long. I do indeed hope that you enjoyed this video. Christopher Hitchens is a very popular figure on YouTube, so I doubt I'll get some of his homeboys festering away in the comments. But yes, I'm going to, of course, thank you ever so much for watching BookTube, and say goodbye.